framing distant scenes, a world within glass and light, frozen yet alive. Here is how I tried out Snappiness's waist level viewfinder. So I was scrolling on Instagram the other day and I found this post by Snappiness. If you don't know Snappiness, he's a creator that has a lot of interesting content about cameras. And this guy really loves old cameras. And he's also kind of a mix of a maker and a camera enthusiast or photographer or whatever you want to call it. And he had this really intriguing video that I found about creating his own waist level viewfinder. Now, I have seen a lot of these things through various different influencers on Instagram, and these are really cool looking devices. For those of you who aren't familiar with waist level viewfinders, these are basically these little attachments that you can put onto your camera that allow you to view the image that you're about to take from top down. Now you might be wondering, when is this kind of thing ever useful? What's the point if I have a screen on the back of my camera anyways that tells me what I'm about to take a photo of? It's probably more accurate too, right? Well, the reason that you would want to use a waist level viewfinder is very simple. It's to be creepy. Okay, so that's kind of a joke, but not really. Waist level viewfinders are particularly useful for street photography, where you want to take photos of people going about their day, but don't necessarily want to be a creepo about it. So you want to be a bit more subtle and hold it down at your waist so you can look top down without having to look like a crazy paparazzi or something. These are also pretty useful if you just want to get a lower angle for a shot for some reason. So a good example is maybe a statue that you want to get more of a low profile on. That's a good way to use a waist level viewfinder. The last reason is that these things just look really cool. I mean, they're really analog looking and they allow you to kind of take yourself away from the screen, which, as we all know, in 2025, we're getting at a place now where everybody really likes analog and going back to the good old days. And so this is a really nice feel for that. It feels very nostalgic. It feels like you're using a camera that is from the past, and it's really magical. So back to Snappiness. Snappiness has a YouTube video where he makes these things for under $10, which is insane because usually you go on Amazon or something, they charge like $40 for these. And all he really needed was a 3D printer, a convex lens, a Fresnel lens, I think that's how you pronounce it, and a mirror. This is going to be pretty easy for us to make because Snappiness has very graciously decided to make these files free, which I'm very thankful for. And so we just need to use those to 3D print this box and then buy all the necessary parts. So as you can probably tell, I'm not in my usual space right now, so I'm going to go ahead and call up our good friends at PCBWay to help out with this one. PCBWay is your one-stop shop for everything PCB manufacturing and assembly. They've helped us out with a ton of videos on this channel before and given us a lot of really, really useful parts, such as circuit boards, but also a bunch of random 3D printed stuff that would have been really annoying for me to print myself. Today, they're going to be helping me out of this 3D printerless situation by helping me print some parts. All I had to do was take the files that were provided by Snappiness and send them over to PCBWay for them to print. This whole process of uploading these files, picking the colors and material, took me less than 10 minutes, and within a few weeks, I had these delivered over to my doorstep. Besides these parts being absolutely high quality and also super smooth, I also want to point out that you can see from these parts that they do have a hot shoe mount at the bottom, which would have been very annoying for me to print myself, even if I did have access to a 3D printer right now. If you're interested in using PCBWay for your next project, click the link in the description below to learn more. So with PCBWay saving me and getting me those parts, I was now ready to actually put everything together, just like how Snappiness did. So there's kind of three parts here. There's the convex lens, there's the mirror, and then there's finally the Fresnel lens at the top. The way that these are kind of arranged is in a shape like this. And what happens here is that the mirror will take the image from the convex lens, flip it over so that it's right side up. And then the Fresnel lens will allow light to come through so we can actually see that from the top a lot more easily. Snappiness has a much better explanation and more detail on how this actually works, so definitely check out his video in the description. I first started arranging the parts together in the box just to kind of make sure that things looked right, and once I confirmed that, I started actually gluing everything together. In Snappiness's video, he says not to use usual super glue because it ends up clouding the lenses and making the whole thing blurry. So I decided to use regular super glue. I glued the convex lens in, glued the mirror in, glued the Fresnel lens in, and then finally glued the cap on top of the Fresnel lens, and we basically had this whole thing complete. This build all in all took less than 10 minutes to assemble. It's kind of crazy, and it's pretty cool. Let's look at it. As you can see here, I can kind of just point this thing at anything and get a nice view of what's actually in front of me from the top. If you look at this thing in person, it's really trippy. It's almost like there's a screen at the top because it's so bright, but it actually isn't. It's literally just a flat lens. I spent a good 20 minutes just kind of playing around with it and pointing it at various things, trying to see how clear the whole image was. And for the most part, I would say that, even with the super glue that we ended up using, there wasn't enough fogging to actually make a huge difference, at least for us. Maybe because I was really careful with putting it on. But yeah, it's kind of sick. It also does feel really magical because it's almost like you're taking the whole view that's in front and condensing it into this box. And it feels almost disorienting to use, but in a very old school way. I don't know if that was necessarily the best way of explaining that, but there's definitely a magical feeling to using this. It's definitely not just a digital viewfinder that you would use with a normal camera, but it definitely feels like much more of a artifact of the past in a way. I also tried attaching this to the top of my camera and messing around with it. One thing that's a bit tricky to note with this thing is that you do need to get used to how the framing works. What you see in here, because this thing is optical, is not necessarily what you're actually going to get on your camera, and there's a decent amount of an offset that you actually need to account for while you're shooting. I will say, as much fun as this thing is, it does look a little goofy on my camera, to be honest, and definitely adds quite an odd shape to the top and maybe doesn't match the whole aesthetic of the camera. But overall, I would say that if you have a few bucks lying around, this is a really fun experiment to try, and it is just a whole lot of fun. There's not really much else of a reason to do this. Maybe this is impractical for most people, but I would say that it's such a cheap project. You can build it so quickly. You might as well just give it a go, and you'll probably learn a little bit about optics along the way. In addition to these 3D printed casings that I got printed from PCBWay, I also had them print this aluminum one for me as well, but I didn't end up using this one necessarily. I will say that the machining on this is really good. This is definitely a pretty high quality part. The reason I didn't use it is more that the weight compared to the 3D printed option is just a lot heavier. So I would recommend that if you're deciding material wise which of these two to use, I'd probably go with the 3D printed one for this particular project, just since it's so light and really makes the camera a lot more agile. So yeah, that's pretty much it. As you can tell, this video is quite a bit shorter than my other videos, mainly because I'm not the one actually designing this thing. We're just kind of recreating what Snappiness has put forth very graciously, might I add, on the internet for free. And I do think that it's a good thing time to time to showcase some cool builds that other people have given out for free as well, in addition to building stuff yourself. But yeah, this thing is really awesome. I'm not sure if I will carry this with me every day, but it definitely was a really fun experiment and taught me quite a bit about optics. Thanks again to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. If you don't have a 3D printer and you want to do this build yourself, I'd highly recommend you go on their site to get this printed, because as you can see, they were able to print this really annoying hot shoe part at the bottom without any issues whatsoever. So definitely a good place to get this made. Thanks for watching. Pear out.